Maria Vasquez rose before dawn, her dark eyes already sharp with quiet resolve as she moved silently through the tangled, dew-drenched underbrush adjacent to the plantation. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine, yet her senses remained alert to the distant, rhythmic crack of whips and muffled cries that marked another day of torment. She paused, pressing her palm against the rough bark of an ancient tree, recalling that harrowing night when everything shattered. The night her father, battered beyond recognition, was dragged away by overseers, leaving her trembling and helpless. Her breath hitched as she remembered her mother's pleading voice lost in the chaos, the sound forever etched into her memory. "Please, just let us go." But the landowner's brutal commands had drowned out her desperate whispers, silencing any hope of escape. Her sister's terrified scream still echoed in her mind, a piercing reminder of innocence ripped cruelly from her grasp. Now, standing amidst the shadows, her clenched fists trembled, not from fear, but from a simmering fury that refused to fade. She gritted her teeth as she watched the silhouettes of the distant manor's windows flicker with candlelight, an ominous glow that seemed to mock her suffering. The oppressive weight of her grief mingled with a faint ember of defiance. She knew she could no longer endure the endless cycle of cruelty. "One day," she whispered aloud, her voice barely, more than a murmur, "they will pay for this." Her fingers brushed the rough fabric of her worn dress, the only armor she possessed, while her mind silently mapped the fractured pieces of her broken life. Every step she took away from the plantation's core was a step toward something unspoken. Toward justice, vengeance, or perhaps both, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and resolve. Beneath her breath, she murmured ancient words learned from her grandmother, calling on spirits long forgotten, as the first light of dawn seeped into the darkened sky, casting shadows that danced with secrets only she dared to pursue. Amidst the relentless clatter of hooves and the sweat-streaked dirt of the morning fields, Maria paused for a breath, her hands trembling slightly as she grasped the fragile sprig of wild herbs hidden beneath her ragged dress. Her eyes darted toward the shadowy figure of Thomas, a young man who worked silently beside her, his dark gaze meeting hers for a fleeting instant. A silent exchange heavy with unspoken hope and quiet rebellion. His lips twitched in a subtle, almost imperceptible smile, conveying reassurance that, despite the brutality around them, they both held on to a fragile spark of resistance. As her fingers involuntarily brushed his sleeve in a covert gesture, Maria's heart quickened with a mixture of trepidation and longing, knowing that those stolen moments could be dangerous if caught. Somewhere in the distance, the imposing figure of Eleanor de la Roche arrived like a dark cloud, her slender frame cutting through the morning haze, her eyes sharp and dismissive, surveying the enslaved workers with a cold, calculating gaze. She paused at the edge of the field, her heels clicking sharply against the muddy earth, a sinister smirk curling on her lips as she issued a command with a voice that cut through the hum of labor. "Hurry up, all of you," she sneered, her tone laced with contempt. "The Easter celebrations await, and I want every one of you to be finished by midday. No excuses." Her gaze lingered on the men and women, lingering especially on Maria, whose back stiffened under the weight of her silent fury. Eleanor's lips curled into a dismissive smile, her fingers flicking dismissively toward a nearby overseer. "Make sure they work harder," she added, voice dripping with condescension. As she turned away, her silk skirts swishing, Maria clenched, her fists, knowing that her moment of quiet defiance was fleeting. Yet the memory of Tomas's steady presence and Eleanor's icy gaze etched into her mind, fueling her secret rebellion amid the oppressive rhythm of forced labor. The air hung heavy with unspoken promises, as fleeting as the dawn itself, but as potent as the storm waiting to break. Under the relentless glare of the midday sun, Eleanor de la Roche stood atop the cracked earth of the plantation's central yard, a cruel smile curling on her lips as she eyed the trembling figure of Samuel, a fellow enslaved worker who had dared to speak up against her during the morning's routine. Her voice, sharp and condescending, sliced through the tense air as she stepped closer, her high heels clicking ominously on the dirt. "Well, Samuel," she sneered, voice dripping with mockery. "What's this? A rebellion? Or just foolishness? You, of all people, should know better than to challenge the divine right of your betters." Her fingertips lazily brushed a lock of her perfectly coiffed hair before she pointed dismissively at Samuel's tattered shirt, stained with sweat and dirt. "Perhaps you forget your place, or perhaps you think the world owes you something? Newsflash, nothing is owed to the likes of you." Her eyes flicked to her 5 young daughters, who stood nearby clutching their toys, watching in fascination as their mother wielded her authority like a sword. Eleanor's lips curled into a triumphant smirk as she leaned in just enough to make Samuel flinch, her voice lowering to a venomous whisper. "You'll learn sooner or later that defiance only earns you pain, and I'll be the one to remind you." She turned away suddenly, dismissing him with a flick of her manicured hand, leaving Samuel trembling where he stood, shoulders hunched, and her daughters giggling softly at their mother's cruelty. From the shadows, Maria watched the scene unfold, her breath hitching as her fists clenched unconsciously. The mockery, the deliberate humiliation ignited a quiet fury deep within her, an unspoken promise that this injustice would not go unchallenged forever. She felt the weight of her silent rage simmer beneath her skin, knowing that someday the cruelty she witnessed today would be met with a reckoning. From the shadows behind a crumbling stone wall, Maria's breath hitched as she watched the chaos unfold beneath the gathering of lanterns and flickering firelight, her eyes fixed on the small, trembling figure of her secret admirer, Diego, as he was dragged forward by the rough hands of the overseers. The boy's young face was streaked with dirt and tears, clutching a broken piece of scrap metal, his only weapon, steadfast in defiance despite the heavy, oppressive air. Eleanor, ever composed, leaned in with a cruel smile, her voice dripping with mockery. "Did you really think your petty rebellion would change anything, little rat?" she sneered, raising her whip with calculated ease. In a flash, the crack echoed through the damp night, and Diego doubled over, a cry torn from his throat as the whip's lash cut into his back. Maria's fists clenched so tightly her nails dug into her palms. Her pulse hammered in her ears as she watched the scene unfold like a nightmare. The crowd of workers and children around her froze, but she felt the cold grip of helplessness tighten, her hopes for justice shattered under the brutal weight of the overseer's authority. She saw Diego stumble, blood staining the dirt as Eleanor's voice continued, taunting him with unrepentant cruelty. "You'll learn, just like the others. Resist, and this will be your fate. Pain, humiliation, and silence." Maria's stomach clenched painfully, her chest heavy with a rising fury that threatened to drown her. She knew that her loved ones, her family, had already paid too high a price for daring to dream of freedom. Watching Diego's trembling body pressed against the ground, Maria's mind flooded with the memory of her father's battered face, her sister's silent screams, and her mother's desperate pleas. The injustice was a deep wound, a sickness that festered inside her, igniting a fire that refused to die. She clenched her jaw, her heart pounding with growing resolve, knowing that someday she would make the cruelty pay. Her trembling hands clenched into fists, her eyes burning with secret fury, as she realized that the brutal echoes of this night would not remain unanswered, no matter how long it took, no matter the cost. Maria's breath hitched as she pushed, opened the creaking door of the small, battered cabin that once belonged to her family. The air inside was thick with the stench of decay and neglect, shadows dancing across broken furniture and torn curtains. Her eyes immediately fell on the scattered remnants of her childhood, the shattered remains of her mother's cherished locket, its delicate silver chain tangled among shards of glass and splintered wood. Her sister's doll, once vibrant with paint and fabric, now reduced to a grimy, torn carcass. Her hand trembled as she reached out, fingers trembling over the cold, broken trinkets that felt like dead echoes of her lost world. Tears blurred her vision as she clutched the locket tightly, feeling its fractured metal bite into her palm. "This was her favorite," she whispered hoarsely, voice trembling with a mix of rage and despair. A sudden gust of wind rattled the broken window panes, sending a chilling shiver down her spine. The destruction was not just physical, it was an unspoken testament to her family's suffering, annihilated, scattered, erased by the cruelty of those who saw them as mere property. Her heart clenched painfully as she realized her loved ones might be dead or irreparably broken. Her mother's pleading voice, her father's battered face, her sister's silent screams echoing in her mind. The weight of it all pressed down on her like an iron cage, fueling a bitter fire she had kept buried deep within. Tears ran hot down her cheeks, but beneath the sorrow, a fierce resolve hardened. This destruction was the final proof. Her world shattered beyond repair. Yet she knew that her vengeance would be the only way to reclaim her dignity. As she stood there, clutching the fragments of her past, her fists clenched instinctively, knuckles white, the blood of her family stained her soul, and with every trembling breath, she solidified her plan. The upcoming Easter at the sacred pond would be her moment, her act of justice, no matter how dark the path. A storm of fury and grief surged inside her, promising retribution, promising that her pain would not remain silent forever. Under cover of night, Maria moved silently through the shadows cast by the flickering lanterns along the estate's perimeter, her heart pounding in her chest like a relentless drumbeat. She had memorized every winding path, every ancient stone and twisted route that led toward the sacred Asud, a quiet, dark basin nestled within the land's embrace, holding secrets and legends older than any of them. Her fingers brushed the rough bark of a nearby tree as she crouched low, eyes darting to the distant figures of guards patrolling the grounds, their silhouettes sharp against the moonlit sky. She listened intently to whispered conversations with trusted allies hiding behind the thick brush, catching snippets of plans and routines. "Easter's the day," a hushed voice murmured, voice trembling with anticipation. "They'll all gather at the pond. Daughters, mother, the whole lot. The Baroness will be drunk on her pride, thinking no one dares challenge her." Maria's breath hitched as she pressed her palm against the cool earth, imagining their innocent laughter, unaware of the storm lurking just beyond the horizon. She pulled from her pocket a small, sharpened blade, the metal gleaming briefly in the moonlight, then tucked it deep into her sleeve. Her eyes flicked to the stars above, and she whispered softly, "Tonight's the night I'll turn their cruelty into darkness. I've studied every step, every sound, every breath. They won't see me coming. When the time comes, I'll be the shadow that finally brings justice, however cruel it may be." Her pulse thrummed as she darted back into the darkness, every sinew taut with purpose. She knew the plan was fragile, delicate as the ancient legends surrounding the pond, but she also knew that her vengeance was as inevitable as the dawn. With unwavering resolve, she melted into the night, her mind already racing through every twist and turn, every heartbeat that might betray her, ready to strike when the moment was ripe, silent as the wind and fierce as the storm she carried inside. Maria moved stealthily through the shadows of the village, her breath shallow and quick as she sought out her small network of oppressed allies. Hidden behind the twisted branches of an ancient fig tree, she whispered urgently, "Tonight's the night. We strike at dawn, but we need everything in place first. Lucinda, I need that old rope you hid beneath the barn, the one sturdy enough to hold what we're planning." The young woman nodded silently, her eyes darting nervously as she handed over the rough, weathered cord wrapped in a cloth soaked with herbs. Ginger and fern, both known for their disguising properties. Maria clenched the ropes tightly, feeling their coarse fibers bite into her palms as she tucked them into her satchel. "And the herbs?" she pressed, voice hushed. "They'll mask our scent, make us invisible to the guards' eyes. I've marked their patrol routes on this scrap of parchment." She showed them a worn piece of paper dotted with hastily drawn lines, shaded in with charcoal. Dangerous, but necessary. "We'll move under cover of darkness, slipping past their watch, then wait close to the pond. When the time comes, I'll be the one to cut the ropes. Then everything will unravel in the water." Her allies exchanged tense glances, their faces etched with shared pain and determination. "You really think they won't see us?" Lucinda whispered, voice trembling. Maria's jaw tightened. "They're blind when it counts. We're just shadows, silent as the wind. This isn't just revenge. It's justice for every tear they've caused, every scream muffled by their greed. I've studied their routines, learned their weak spots. We'll strike before dawn, and when they realize what's happening, it'll be too late." She drew a deep breath, her eyes glinting fiercely. "Tonight, we turn the tide of our suffering into a flood of reckoning. We do this not out of hatred alone, but because we are no longer willing to be silent witnesses to their cruelty. We'll reclaim what they stole, our dignity, our voices, our lives. And when the water claims them, they'll know the power of justice born from the depths of pain." Shaking the last droplets of fear from her mind, Maria straightened, her resolve unbreakable. As they dispersed into the night, she whispered into the darkness, "Hold fast, my friends. Tomorrow, we make history." Under the darkened sky, Maria moved with calculated silence through the shadows cast by flickering lanterns, her heart pounding like a war drum. Every step was deliberate, her breath shallow as she slipped past the guards, her fingers trembling slightly as she loosened the latch on a water barrel hidden among the brush. The cool, still air carried the faint scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine, masking her hushed movements. Her mind replayed the brutal memories, the screams of her family, the broken bodies, the blood staining the soil, fueling her resolve and whispering doubts in equal measure. She paused beside the pond's edge, the moonlight casting silver ripples on the tranquil water, now tainted by her clandestine meddling. Her fingers brushed the coarse fibers of a small cloth soaked in bitter herbs, her makeshift poison, prepared earlier that day in secret. She whispered softly, voice thick with emotion, "Is this what I've become? A murderer in the shadows just like them?" A gust of wind stirred the leaves, whispering secrets of ancestral curses that seemed to echo around her. She clenched her fists, gazing at the water's surface as if searching for answers, the weight of her actions pressing down like an anvil. Her eyes flicked toward the distant silhouette of the estate, faint figures moving inside, knowing that tomorrow, when dawn broke, everything would change. The innocence of Eleanor's daughters played in her mind, their laughter, their delicate features, the thought of harming them gnawed at her soul. Yet her pain was a fire that refused to die out, burning with the memory of her lost kin. She carefully poured the poisoned water into the trough. Her resolve hardened, and she whispered, "For every tear shed, for every injustice, I will make them taste the depths of ruin tonight. I become the storm they never saw coming." Her figure melted into the darkness as she retreated into the shadows, her mind torn between mercy and wrath, knowing that her act of vengeance was a step into a world from which she might never return. As Maria crouched near the shadowed edge of the sacred pond, her ears caught the hushed voices of her closest allies gathered in secret beneath the gnarled branches of ancient oaks. An old woman, trembling but fierce, whispered softly, They say this water is cursed, haunted by spirits of those who suffered here long before us. The ancestors believe the pond holds a wrath that cannot be tamed, a curse born from centuries of injustice and blood spilled on these shores. The others nodded solemnly, their faces etched with fear and reverence. Tonight, the old woman continued, voice barely audible, if you spill blood or poison in these waters, their spirits may rise, demanding retribution from the living. The land remembers, and it's watching us now. Maria's gaze flicked. Between their anxious faces and the dark, rippling surface of the pond, thick with shadows and secrets, her heart hammered with conflicting emotion, hope, dread, and a gnawing sense of moral peril. She clenched her fists, feeling the rough texture of her ragged clothes, as if grounding herself in the cold truth of her choice. "No," she whispered, fiercely, voice trembling. "This curse is our last hope. If I do this, I'm unleashing forces that might turn against us all, but it's the only way to end their tyranny forever." Her eyes flashed with a desperate resolve as she watched the flickering torchlights of her comrades disappear into the night, knowing that once she crossed this line, dipping her hands into the cursed water, she would invoke ancient spirits, long dormant, unleashing not just her vengeance but the wrath of the land itself. The legend hung heavy in the air, a silent warning that justice, when mixed with the sacred and the cursed, could become an unstoppable force, forever binding her fate to the haunted depths of the Asud. Under the cloak of night, Maria moved, with silent purpose through the dense shadows of the estate, her heartbeat pounding like a relentless drum in her ears. Dressed in dark, tattered garments that cloaked her figure, she felt the rough fabric biting into her skin, a grounding weight amidst the chaos of her thoughts. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she navigated the labyrinth of hedges and abandoned tools, every step bringing her closer to the sacred pond where her revenge would unfold. The distant glow of lanterns and the faint echoes of laughter drifted faintly across the cool air, carried by the breeze. She paused behind a thick cluster of bushes, peering through a narrow gap as Eleanor and her 5 daughters arrived, their figures illuminated briefly by flickering torchlight. The Baroness, tall and commanding, smiled coldly as she ordered her children to splash and squeal in the water's shallow edge. "Come, my dears, enjoy this beautiful spring day," Eleanor murmured with a sinister tone, her eyes glinting with a cruel satisfaction. The girls giggled, splashing each other, their innocence contrasting sharply with the dark intent burning within Maria. She clenched her fists, feeling the sting of her ragged nails digging into her palms. Her mind raced, replaying the memories of her family's suffering, the brutal nights, the broken dreams, the stolen lives. Every fiber of her being screamed to act, yet doubt clawed at her soul. Is this justice, she wondered, or merely the vengeance of a wounded heart? Her lips trembled as she whispered under her breath, "This is the only way. They will pay, one way or another." As Eleanor's daughters squealed and played in the water, Maria's eyes flicked to the ancient trees surrounding the pond, silent witnesses to her resolve. In that moment, with the moon casting ghostly shadows over the tranquil yet cursed Asud, Maria stepped forward slowly, her shadow merging with the darkness, knowing that once she crossed this threshold, she would invoke forces older and more terrible than she could ever comprehend. Her hand hovered over her skirt, clutching a small hidden talisman, a token of hope and defiance, before she finally took a deep breath and prepared to strike, her plan set against the tranquil surface that was both a sacred spring and her instrument of justice. The moon hung low, casting silvery shadows across the darkened landscape as Maria pressed herself against the rough bark of an ancient oak, her breath shallow and ragged. The distant clip-clop of hooves and muffled voices of the guards echoed through the quiet night, heightening her senses to an almost unbearable degree. Her trembling fingers clutching the hidden dagger trembled in tandem, knowing this moment could shatter everything she had worked for. She peered cautiously through a small gap in the leaves, her eyes narrowing as she watched two sentinels patrol the estate's perimeter, their lanterns casting flickering circles of light. "Something's off," one murmured, voice low and tense, as they paused beneath a cluster of twisted branches. Maria's heart hammered against her ribs, her mind racing. Should she risk moving now, or retreat into the shadows, waiting for a safer moment? Her muscles ached from holding her breath, and her mind fought between the fierce desire for justice and the instinct to survive. She pressed her back tighter against the bark, feeling the rough texture scrape her skin, and whispered fiercely, "No turning back now. I have to do this." Her eyes flicked to the pond's dark surface, shimmering faintly under the moonlight like a mirror to her resolve. She knew that any misstep could betray her presence, alert the guards, and ruin everything she'd planned. Still, the weight of her anger, of her grief, of her burning need for retribution, pushed her forward. Her hand tightened around the dagger, knuckles white, as she slowly slipped out from her hiding spot, her footsteps muffled by fallen leaves, heart pounding in her ears like a war drum. Every muscle strained as she inched closer to her destination. Every sense stretched to its limit, her mind torn between the icy grip of fear and the blazing fire of vengeance. The night was breathless with tension, the shadows alive with silent witnesses. The ancient trees, the distant guards, and the ghost of her long-buried pain, all conspiring to decide whether she would succeed or be swallowed by the darkness, forever. Suddenly, the tranquil harmony of the gathering shattered like fragile glass, as a young girl, Eleanor's youngest daughter, lost her footing on the uneven stones by the pond's edge. Her tiny feet slipped and her arms flailed wildly in a desperate attempt to regain balance. "Mama, help!" The child's voice rang out, high and trembling, as she teetered dangerously close to the water's dark, swirling depths. Time seemed to slow for Maria, hidden behind a thicket of tangled branches, her breath hitching in her chest. Her eyes widened at the innocence so stark against her dark purpose, a stark reminder of the line she dared cross. She clenched her fists, heart pounding a deafening drum in her ears, her mind torn. Should she seize this fragile moment and act, or should she hesitate, risking everything she'd planned? Eleanor's screams pierced through the chaos as her daughter's dress caught on a jagged stone, causing her to stumble even closer to the water. "Lily, hold on!" Eleanor shouted, reaching out with trembling hands. But Maria's gaze fixed on the girl's trembling figure, so filled with carefree innocence, so far removed from the brutal cruelty that had shaped her own life. Maria's throat tightened, her fingers curled into fists, sweat pouring down her temples. Every instinct urged her to strike now, to turn this tragic distraction into her final act of vengeance. Yet her eyes lingered on the child's soft, trembling face. Her innocence, like a fragile, shimmering mirror, reflecting the cost of her vengeance. Was this moment a sign to abandon her dark plan? To let innocence prevail? Or was this chaos, a cruel test, an unforgiving reminder that her path was forever stained? Heart pounding fiercely, Maria pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp, torn between the shadows of revenge and the pure, fleeting sight of youthful trust and playfulness. The wind carried Lily's giggles, tangled with Eleanor's frantic cries, and Maria felt her resolve waver, her breath ragged, her mind swirling in a storm of moral torment. In the chaos of splintered silence and rising splashes, Maria's eyes locked onto Eleanor's frantic figure, her body flailing as the woman struggled against the icy grip of the water. Heart pounding with a tumult of fury and sorrow, Maria surged forward, grabbing Eleanor by the shoulders, forcing her closer to the water's edge. "You thought yourself untouchable," Maria whispered fiercely, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "Your cruelty ends tonight." With one powerful shove, she pushed Eleanor into the pond herself, the woman's desperate screams muffled by the dark, swirling water. As Eleanor disappeared beneath the surface, Maria knelt, clutching her chest, her breath ragged. Then, voice hoarse but unwavering, she recited the ancient curse passed down from her ancestors, words thick with the weight of history and vengeance. "Spirit of the waters, guardian of the cursed and the broken, hear my plea. May the sins of those who wield power without justice be washed away, swallowed by the depths they have defiled. Let the waters reclaim what was stolen and awaken the spirits of resilience buried beneath the surface. May this act of retribution awaken the land's fury and restore balance, so that the innocent may find peace beneath these sacred waves." Her eyes flicked to the trembling daughters, their innocence etched in wide, frightened eyes. And for a moment, she hesitated, her moral torment twisting hard within her. Yet, driven by relentless fury and ancestral whispers, she knew this was her final act, an act that fused justice with spiritual rebirth. As the pond's dark waters closed over Eleanor, the air thickened with a heavy, ancient power. Maria rose slowly, the weight of her deed settling deep into her bones, knowing that this transformation, this sacred curse, would forever mark her spirit and the land she fought to free from cruelty. Eleanor's frantic thrashing sent ripples across the darkened surface of the pond, her once imposing form now reduced to flailing limbs and desperate screams that pierced the heavy silence. The water, laced with the weight of centuries of suffering and retribution, churned violently beneath her, turning a sinister shade of midnight black as if cursed by the very spirit Maria had invoked. "Please!" Eleanor's voice cracked, trembling with a mixture of fear and fury. "This isn't justice, it's madness!" But Maria stood motionless at the water's edge, her eyes fixed on the tableau of chaos unfolding before her, her heart pounding fiercely, both from adrenaline and the weight of her own moral torments. The air grew thick with an unnatural hum, the wind whispering in voices old and ominous, as if the land itself mourned or celebrated the act. The water surged higher, spiraling into turbulent whirlpools that pulled at Eleanor's limbs, her screams muffled as the dark depths swallowed her in a relentless embrace, defying any hope of salvation. With each agonized splash, the pond seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the surface roiling as if awakening from a centuries-old curse. A sudden, blistering stillness followed. The violent agitation subsided, leaving only the ripples fading into an ominous calm. Maria's breath hitched. She saw Eleanor's face twisted in shock, her eyes wide with the realization that her hubris had sealed her fate. "You thought power was eternal," Maria whispered, voice trembling yet resolute, as the cursed waters continued to swirl and pulse around her, embodying the storm of wrath she had summoned. The mythic curse had been awakened, binding Eleanor's doom to the very depths she had once mocked and exploited, sealing her cruelty beneath the surface forever. As the water settled into an unnatural silence, Maria's gaze lingered on the dark abyss, knowing that her act, born of unyielding fury and ancestral wrath, had irrevocably transformed the sacred pond into a vessel of justice, haunted now by the supernatural echoes of her retribution. Silent and trembling, the three surviving daughters clung to the muddy bank of the sacred pond, their small bodies shivering as tears mixed with the cold water streaming down their cheeks. Their wide eyes darted wildly, haunted by the chaos that unfolded minutes ago, witnessing their mother's act of vengeance, feeling the dark waters close around them, and hearing the agonized screams of Eleanor as she plunged beneath the surface. One girl, barely 10, whimpered, clutching her little sister's trembling hand and whispering, "Is she gone? Did she do it?" Her voice cracked, trembling as the heavy weight of shock pressed down. Nearby, the others stared at the unnatural stillness, their bodies soaked and trembling, their innocence forever scarred by the horror they'd witnessed. Behind them, shadows flickered, movement in the darkness, an outline of Maria slipping away, cloaked in black, her figure blending seamlessly into the night's suffocating concealment. Her face, streaked with dirt and tears, was a mask of conflicted relief and guilt, her heart pounding like a war drum, knowing her deed had shattered the chains of her past, yet questioning whether it had truly brought her peace. As whispers of the night grew louder, men shouting, lanterns bobbing in the distance. Maria's footsteps faded into the shadows, her silhouette swallowed by the dense woods. She cast a glance back at the trembling girls, their fragile forms, fragile remnants of her vengeance, before melting away into the dark, knowing that her act of justice had sealed her fate as both hero and monster. The pond remained eerily silent, its surface slick with the aftermath of chaos, holding secrets of a revenge that would echo through generations, an act of fury that transformed the sacred into a shrine of wrath, forever haunted by the reverberations of blood, guilt, and unyielding hope. In the quiet aftermath of her act, Maria's name became a whispered legend among oppressed communities, a shadowy symbol of defiance that flickered like a candle in the darkness. Her deed, carried out beneath the sacred, cursed waters during Easter's hush, ignited clandestine acts of resistance, hidden messages etched into trees, secret gatherings by moonlight, and furtive whispers around dying fires. To those who knew her story, she was no longer merely a slave. She had become a myth of raw, unwavering justice, her silhouette blending with the night's concealment. Her presence a ghostly reminder that even the most brutal chains could be shattered by one soul's fierce resolve. Rumors spread like wildfire. They say Maria's spirit still roams the woods, watching, waiting, a voice would declare in hushed tones, eyes darting to shadows where no one stood. Children whispered of her in trembling voices, clutching makeshift charms, fearing her wrath and wishing for her strength. Some swore they saw her figure, dark hair flowing, eyes blazing, standing silently at the edge of the pond, her silhouette illuminated briefly by flickering lanterns, then vanishing into the night. Others believed her voice echoed in the wind, a haunting lullaby of justice, telling them to keep fighting, no matter how deep the darkness. As her legend grew, so did the resolve of those oppressed, fueling secret plans, dangerous rebellions, and acts of defiance that defied the cruelty of their oppressors. Yet Maria herself vanished into the countryside, her identity cloaked in myth, a mysterious guardian whose act of vengeance transcended bloodshed, becoming a symbol of resilience, moral complexity, and the unbreakable spirit of those who refused to bow. Her story was etched into the collective memory like a scar, a reminder that sometimes justice demands the price of transformation, heroism woven with darkness, hope forged from despair, and a name whispered on the wind as a promise that the fight for freedom endures beyond the shadows. The haunted pond remains a silent witness to her act, its dark waters whispering secrets in the wind long after Maria vanished into the shadows of the night. The surface, once shimmering with the reflection of Easter lanterns, now pulses with a ghostly sheen, forever stained by the blood of Eleanor and her daughters, a silent curse woven into its depths. Locals speak in hushed tones about the cursed, Asud, claiming the water holds the breath of justice and revenge, a place where shadows dance beneath the surface, twisting and swirling like the memories of those who dared to challenge fate. They say the pond's cursed, an old woman murmurs by the fire, her eyes flickering with fear and reverence. Maria's fury seeped into every droplet, turning it dark as night itself. Some swear they hear her voice in the howling wind, calling us to remember, to never forget the price of cruelty. As dawn approaches, the mist clings to the reeds and the tangled branches that surround the water, an eerie veil hiding the secrets beneath. Children dare not approach, and elders cross themselves when passing by, sensing the heaviness that lingers like a curse. Over time, legends grow of Maria's spirit wandering the woods, her silhouette seen at twilight, her eyes blazing with a fierce, unyielding resolve. They say she became part of the very essence of that cursed pond, its dark waters echoing her unquenchable anger and grief, a reminder that justice carved from trauma often leaves scars that never fade. The villagers whisper that the pond is more than a mere body of water. It's a battleground of morality, a liminal space where death and rebirth entwine. Her story persists, etched into the collective consciousness like a scar, a testament to the unbreakable resilience of the oppressed and the dangerous allure of vengeance. And so, the haunted Asud remains a silent witness to her act. Its waters both a tomb and a cradle, a sacred abyss where justice and darkness intertwine beneath the watchful eyes of the moon, forever guarding the secret of a woman who dared to challenge the cruelest injustice of her time. Beneath the ghostly glow of the full moon, Maria's spirit lingered silently beside the cursed pond, her eyes blazing with a fierce, unyielding resolve that had never truly faded. As the cold wind whispered through the twisted branches, her spectral form hovered just beyond sight, watching over the land that had once been stained by her suffering and now bore the lasting mark of her vengeance. She remembered the night. She had made her choice. The desperation, the trembling pause before she pushed Eleanor into the dark waters, her voice trembling yet resolute as she whispered, "This is not just justice. It's the end of your cruelty." The water had swallowed Eleanor's screams, but Maria's eyes remained fixed, burning with a mixture of grief and defiance. Legends said her spirit fused with the shadows, her silhouette occasionally flickering at twilight, a guardian of the oppressed, a symbol of the unbreakable resilience that justice must sometimes be wrought in darkness. Villagers still spoke in hushed tones, trembling with awe and fear. "Did you see her? The woman in the mist, watching from the depths?" The pond's surface rippled as if alive, an eternal mirror to her suffering and strength, whispering secrets of a woman who dared to challenge the deepest injustice, transforming her pain into legend. Her presence was a silent vow, an unspoken promise that her act of vengeance would forever stain the waters, turning the sacred Asud into a liminal space where justice and darkness entwined beneath the watchful eye of the moon. And in that limbo, her spirit remained eternal, a myth woven into the fabric of the land, an unrelenting reminder that sometimes the most profound justice is born from the depths of trauma, forged in the shadows, and destined to haunt the very waters that bore witness to her final act.